Is this thing on? Hold on. This is my bit. This is what I do. I think it's on.
Oh,
Like, I'm pretty sure it's on. Is this on?
yeah. Yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Can you see it? Is it
I can
audible?
see it.
Is it visible?
It was audible. I muted it.
You muted it?
Yeah, so I can hear you in Discord.
Oh. Well, how do you know it's audible if you muted it?
Because I can unmute it.
Okay.
All
Amazing.
right.
All right. So,
Amazing.
this is Erin Green, folks, the winner of the Ben Burgis January 6th debate, the chosen winner. I mean, it was a unanimous, victory. Everyone in the chat agreed that Ben Burgis looked like a fool. And again, I just want to say I speak for myself. I'm sorry if you get in trouble for the things that I say, but it's already happened, so it's not like he's going to debate you again. So, but yeah, how did you feel about it? What's your, like, this happened for you like 12 hours ago, 14 hours ago, something like that? Like, what is the morning after, what is your perspective?
Yeah. I had a good time. It was an interesting experience to have. It was kind of my first foray really into having any like official political discussion or debate with anybody or anything like that. I think he did end up talking a little bit longer for each time. I felt like every time he was talking, he would bring up a whole lot of points, almost gish galloping a little bit. That it was really hard for me to address everything that he was saying when we were debating. And I actually, in preparation, spent the entire week leading up to it doing research and writing my points down and getting everything together. Like one of the few things that I wish I had done differently was I wrote a closing statement to read at the end of it, and because of the nature of the debate or whatever, I guess ended up getting distracted and doing my closing statement kind of off the cuff. So I was just, yeah.
Yeah,
But overall,
that's one of the reasons why I don't like debates with like a strict timer. Like, I like I've had debates that have like been 6 hours long, where like it's just like someone's giving me their life story and why they voted for Trump, and like they're crying on camera, and it's like, okay, that's great, right? So I don't like debates that are like structured like that, because like it creates an environment where you feel like you need to prepare because it's structured, but by nature of the structure, all the preparation just goes out the window. Um, and I feel like Ben Burgess really did take advantage of you in the sense where like he just wouldn't shut the fuck up. Like he would just keep going on and on. And most of the things that he was saying were like fluffing his writing. Like, oh, I wrote this piece, and like, oh, the piece I wrote and my intellectual credentials, and it was like, and it was bizarre. And then when you asked him if he had read the Doctrine of Fascism, and he was like, nope. And I was like, to me, that was just incredible. It's incredible. And I have some like I took some notes this morning. One of the things that I took really hardcore offense, and you can let me know how you feel about this, was his constant like I feel like there's some sort of like other power like guiding his decision making process here, but his insistence on comparing January 6th to Black Lives Matter demonstrations, like that was just it. Like to me, it's like it's not even an apples and oranges, because at least both of those things are fruit. Like it's a situation where it's like comparing like moon rocks and jelly beans. Like it's like there's no even remote like comparison whatsoever. And so like, but he insists on saying that like one of the things that he said was that all political riots are bad. First of all, right, in my estimation, that's an insurrection attempt, not a riot. And the reason I think he's trying to downgrade it to riot is so that he can play the both sideserism over the 2020 protests. And I noticed a lot of popular left-wing YouTubers over the course of 2020 come out as anti-riot. And to me, that really just shows like a lack of like they really need to like just go outside and talk to normal people, because most people don't give a shit about the quote riots. They just don't give a shit, right? There's a lot of like liberals that maybe live in the suburbs or whatever that care really really much about that, but most people that live in cities, most like people of color, minorities, will say like, yeah, riots good, and so but like he uses the word riot as a boogie word and tries to compare it to January 6th, which downgrades what happened on January 6th, and then also like significantly upgrades or whatever the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. And so I wanted to get your opinion on that because, like, you touched on that a little bit, but you didn't have enough time to actually, like, I don't know, get, like, a good full statement on that. So I would like your opinion on that.
Sure. Yeah. I think you're really right on the money. The context between the Black Lives Matter protests and the riots and the resulting violence that happened is completely and totally different, whole scale from what happened on January 6th. The intention there was to cause harm, was to make change, was to get Trump as a president, was to stop the steal, right? Was to hang Mike Pence, as some people said. The intention for the Black Lives Matter protests has not been violent. The intention has been just to get, accountability for police and justice for all across the board. And I think comparing the two really does a disservice to the just the pure historical value that what happened on January 6th has, because we really haven't had, and I'll stand by this, that level of political violence in the United States here in a very, very long time. So that's my opinion. I think it's you're pretty much right. I don't think it's fair to compare the two at all.
The biggest thing for me is Ben Burgis ignores the context and the history and the lead up to these things. He just says political riot, bad, as if like there's no historical context. Like, you look at the historical context of the Black Lives Matter demonstrations that took place in 2020, right? It's like centuries and centuries and centuries of extreme, brutal genocide and violence. Police killing after police killing after police killing after police killing, and nothing changes. That was the precipice. And then to compare that and to say both are bad with a bunch of boomers on Facebook thinking that there's like a shadow man in the government who's gonna he's gonna bring the storm and reinstitute Trump as a dictator, right? Those are not the same thing in any capacity. And to me, this just showcases that Ben Burgis doesn't give a fuck enough about right-wing violence or why right-wingers think the things that they do, right? And this is something you touched on in the by the end of the debate, is that fascism is very much so a mode of thought, right? It's like the hive mind. It's like saying, like, again, the slogan of QAnon is where we go one, we go all. They all think the same thing, and they all get their news from, like, the same kind of sources. And that all led up to, like, you look at the through line of Trump not saying he would concede if he lost the election. People asked him that because people knew something like this could happen. And so they would ask him at the White House press conferences and other places, will you concede the election if you lose? Will you concede the election if you lose? Will you concede the election if you lose? And he always came up with a way to get around that question. That is number one. But Ben Burgis doesn't care about that. He doesn't care. And he's comparing things like police murders of, like, just, again, hundreds of thousands of people to, like, Donald Trump's personal ambitions and manipulating people via Facebook misinformation and so forth, right? And to me, it's just like, it shows that he is not super interested in granular detail. And he really is just kind of like a debate bro. Like, he really wants to be that, like, debate bro guy who's obsessed with logic at all times, even though, and I'm getting petty again, but, like, he's written 2 books. Give them an argument where the whole book is about fallacies and how to argue. And again, he engaged in ad hominem attacks against me, saying my arguments are bad because I use bad words, right? So, boom, his first book might as well light it up in flames. And then he wrote the second book, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. Well, I think the world is burning because he burned his first book and then it got out of control. I think he burned it at, like, a gender reveal party. And then, like, all of a sudden there's wildfires. And then he writes a book on cancel culture. And then he engages in canceling a comedian, right? Because I use naughty words. And so, like, again, this guy to me seems like he doesn't have that many convictions. And I'm willing to call him out on that. And again, if Ben Burgis wants to apologize or in the future, and if he revises, like, I'm willing to, put the water under the bridge. But, like, he seems more interested in the spectacle of debate and, the mathematical, like, forms of logic that are out the window. Right-wingers do not care about logic. They just don't. They might say they do, but they just don't, right? They just, like, there is nothing logical that you can say to convince a QAnon person who breached the Capitol that what they're doing is actually kind of crazy. And, like, there is something logical about saying, hey, police keep killing people. Let's actually go up and fight back against the police. That is logical, right? Going to January 6th, going to the Capitol on January 6th with guns and bombs, which, by the way, this was left out of the debate you had altogether, was that they planted bombs at the DNC and the RNC buildings the day before. Mm-hmm. I mean, like literally, they were bombs. If they were not diffused, thousands of people would have died. Absolutely. Case closed. But he ignores that. He pretends it didn't happen. He just pretends it didn't happen. And so, like, that's kind of my problem, is, like, he focuses on the granular minutia of defining a word such as killed. Oh, no one was killed. You know what I mean? So, like, what do you think about, like, the, you know, like, just the granular minutia of getting into, like, defining words versus, like, the overall picture here?
Well, and he says in his article itself, you know, what does it matter what we call it if we all agree that it was bad? And I think, you know, that's an okay point, but at the same time, you know, words matter. They have weight. I think, you know, using historical language to describe a historical event is appropriate. Overall, you know, I think he tends to criticize leftists for having this degree of extremist language or what have you. But I think it's because of that messaging that he disagrees with, not in spite of, that we see his other point that he brought up, that, you know, Republican lawmakers are trying to step away from Trump and distance themselves from Trumpism, right? And it's because of that messaging that we disagree with. It's because that people are so riled up by what happened with Trump that, you know, people are starting to distance themselves and try to keep Trump out of the, you know, conversation for the most part. I think that would be good for establishment Republicans, is to retake control of their party from Trump, because whether people want to admit it or not, Trump still has a lot of power, even though he has no real objective political power right now. He can't, like, make any decisions or control anything, but he has a huge amount of influence. Those Trump people are not going away. Those people that stormed the Capitol on January 6th are not going away. They are still going to be here. They, I feel, are going to be steadfast in their beliefs, and almost feel reinforced because of what happened. You know, I almost feel like there's not really a whole lot we can do right now about Trump and the amount of control he has over Republicans and their influence. So, you know, we really need to take a moment and appreciate the fact that, you know, it's because of these leftist activists that are using this language. It's because the media is using this language, that we have people so willing to distance themselves from it. And that would be good for everybody, I think.
I'm sorry, I just read a chat message. It was really funny. But no, I agree. Another aspect is that, like, Ben Burgis said this on the David Feldman show, where he thinks that January 6th is, like, no big deal, and also that the beer hall putsch was no big deal. And, like, we need to realize that this is, like, a linear kind of track of escalating violence, right? Where it's like Trump supporters went from lock her up to breaching the Capitol gates. What could, like, and it's not, like you said, Trump is not going away. Trumpism is not going away. And especially if some of these people are only getting 8 months in prison, they're not going away. And when they come out of prison, like, look at the prison system, they're probably going to go to prison and get their beliefs reinforced, and then come out of prison even more angry, even more upset, right? And so, and look at the families of these people that genuinely think that Trump, like, they actually, and again, I need to say this as a disclaimer, Joe Biden is the legitimate winner of the 2020 election. I am in no way giving any credence to the idea that Trump won the election. That is false. That is fake news. But they genuinely think that. And so, imagine the family members of these people that are going to jail, right? They're going to get more radicalized, right? Trump has been taking a little bit of a media break. He's not just playing golf. He's definitely thinking about his next moves. And that's why it is so important to me, and to you, it's seeming, that we identify what this is. right? January 6th is not the end of anything. It is like the end of chapter 1 or something in like, a grand story. And so the idea that we're like anyone is squabbling over the petty definitional, like granular minutia of what these words mean when these people are still out there and they're still planning attacks and they're still like going to do things. Like look at what happened in Los Angeles at the We Spa protests, where like a fascist went and stabbed a bunch of people that were just protesting for trans rights, and then cops backed them up and then got them a secure escort out of the area after they had stabbed people. And then cops shot some of the protesters with rubber bullets defending the fascists. That's something we need to realize. Ben Burgis isn't going to talk about that kind of stuff. And that's why, like, I'm more concerned with, like, making sure that we actually talk about this in the way that it needs to be talked about, as if we're in the middle of a saga that is ongoing, right? And so, like, I think Ben Burgis is more concerned with, like, oh, this is in the past. Let's have, like, the perfect take on a historical event. We're not talking about something that happened in, like, 1937 or, like, 1864, where we have all the facts and we can just look at everything from the top down and make the perfect analysis. We are living in history, and new things happen all the time. And that's why it is so important to have these conversations and to do so in ways that are productive. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think looking through some of the comments on our debate, I think a lot of people took issue with the fact that I cited Umberto, I can't speak today. Umberto Eco's 14 Points of Fascism. And one of the ones that's important here that I wanted to highlight was the obsession with a plot. That the followers must feel besieged, and that the easiest way to solve the plot is to appeal to xenophobia. And we saw that initially with the Bush administration and the war in Iraq, and we're seeing it again now. Except instead of having a foreign enemy, we have a domestic one with QAnon, right? Where it's the secret pedophile politicians that the Q guy is going to come on and the storm's going to come and he's going to clear everybody out. And it's that obsession with the plot that I think is going to be the hardest for leftists to break as far as getting people away from QAnon. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face as a society is fighting this kind of misinformation and this obsession and this conspiracy. And so I think that is primarily what we should focus on if our goal is to get people the help that they need to stop obsessing with this insane conspiracy. And if our goal is to bring people over to the left, using the working class as a vehicle for that, then I think that's one thing that we can't ignore, is their obsession with QAnon and breaking that plot there.
Absolutely. And like you were saying at the near the end of the debate, and where you said that like you would consider George W. Bush and just the American state in and of itself to be, if not fascist now, but definitely going to be if it keeps at this trajectory. And so one of the things that I enjoyed about Ben's reaction to that is that he was like, "Oh, I was surprised that you have this opinion." To me, it's like one of the things. I know I'm getting petty, but this is my wheelhouse. But like to me, he was talking about like my arguments, like that he is aware of, or to his knowledge, my arguments or my perspectives are the same as everyone else's. Like the idea that he thinks that you have the cookie cutter opinion that like he ascribes to like some person on my left that like. And then you went outside of that paradigm, and it kind of put him on his toes a little bit. And I again, appreciate that from your perspective. But it is really important that we like analyze the fascism angle of this. And we look at like, there are still people, not that many, thankfully, as there were in like 2003, but there's still people out there that think that the war that we went into in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that is still justified. There are people out there that genuinely 20 years later don't understand that that was actually bad, right? And so those people, like, we're talking about fantasy worlds. Like, this is really, like, there's the great, and we can even trace that even further back to, like, the Lost Cause narrative, of the Civil War. Like, I saw a statistic that said about 10% of high school seniors know that the Civil War was about slavery. Right? Like that, like
Yeah.
if that doesn't put your brain into like, holy fuck, what are we doing here mode, I don't know what will. And like, it really just boils down to people living in alternate worlds where like they've got alternative facts, right? They've got their own news sources, they're in their own bubbles, and that's just been like put in a pressure cooker with the internet, where people don't have to go, talk on the phone to their friend who's kind of creepy, or go to a party and meet a conspiracy theorist, right? They can just go online on Facebook, and all of a sudden they're stuck in their filter bubble because there's a pandemic and people can't leave the house, right? And then they're like, I want to leave the house, and then they turn into the anti-vaxxers, the pandemic's not real kind of people, and they just live in an alternate world. And then the problem with that is that because there's so many people that live in that fantasy world, there's so many people producing content from that fantasy world. So like, it's like you got Trump is like the kind of the top of that, but then you've got all the right-wing podcasters that provide an escape from reality for these people. And we need to find a way to crack into that. Like, otherwise, like, I mean, like, we're fucked. I mean, like, if we can't find a way to de-radicalize people and to prevent them from falling deeper into these rabbit holes, then really I don't know what else that we can do. And I think that step one of that is identifying the problem. And it's shocking to me that there's so many, so-called leftists online that are struggling to identify the problem. And the problem really boils down to people living in an alternate world.
Yeah, no, I agree. I struggled with that a lot with my mom. Not with the political kind of bubble, but she had a big drug problem, and so it was like really hard for her to control. And so at a point, it got just so bad that like any thought that came into her head, no matter how toxic it was or whatever, was true, and that she just lived in this own world. And it was so hard to pull her out of that because you could show her evidence that I don't know, the stove isn't on or something like that, but in her world the stove is on and there's no convincing her otherwise. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know if you've seen the new Bo Burnham special Inside,
I have
but there's a
not.
song that he does. I highly recommend it. It's very, very good. I've got the entire soundtrack on repeat right now on my
Are you
Spotify.
listening
So
to it as we speak?
as we speak, yes, I always
Amazing.
am listening to. It's always playing in my head.
It's always inside, folks.
Always inside. Yeah, that's the point. But yeah, there's a song called Welcome to the Internet. And it starts out really slow. We've got a little bit of everything here, and you can come and enjoy. And he's talking about describing all the things that you can find on the internet, like puppies and kittens, and you can connect with your friends and stuff. And then he starts slowly getting into the more like creepy stuff, like, oh, foot fetishists, or oh, here's some conspiracy, or oh, here's a little bit of anti-vax documentation for you, or stuff like that. And then by the end of the song, it's just like completely wild and off the rails, and it really kind of highlights just how kind of spirally the internet can be if you spend a lot of time on it researching things that you're interested in. You can just spiral downward and get into some crazy, crazy ideas. It's like the iceberg meme where you get to the very, very bottom of the iceberg and it's all like glitch text or whatever. Yeah, it's pretty insane. I think the internet definitely helps with that as well. But yeah, primarily fascism, I think, is alive and well in America. I think it has been since at least the narrative of like what the 40s and 50s, where it was like the parents with the nuclear family and stuff like that, and the white picket fence, and that was the ideal American lifestyle, right? That was what everyone was working toward. If you read Mussolini's writings, it's hard to walk away from that and not feel like, Mussolini's idea of what is fascism could apply to even that standard of American life, right? And he even says fascism is now clearly defined not only as a regime, but as a doctrine. And all doctrines aim at directing the activities of men toward a given objective, but these activities in their turn react on the doctrine, modifying and adjusting it to new needs. So the fascism of old even back then, before Hitler took power, would very clearly not be the fascism of today. That's the point of fascism, is that it's always changing to the needs of the fascist. So it's trying to narrow it down and define it seems like a fool's errand.
And it's another good point that the chat's bringing up is that, yes, is it important to stop and de-radicalize and prevent people from going down these rabbit holes? Yes. But it's also very important that we make people, before they go down these rabbit holes, aware of what they are. Like, there are a lot of people, let's say, like when I was younger, like let's say 10 years ago, my mom would turn on Fox News. She wasn't a rabid right-winger, but every now and then she would turn Fox News on, let's just scrolling through, just whatever news station is first or whatever she would turn on, not realizing that Fox News was a far-right propaganda machine, right? And so that's really the main thing, is you need to prevent people from going down these rabbit holes in the first place. You need to get people that, like, already agree with you, like, oh yeah, people, probably should have rights, Trump's kind of mean. You need to get them to understand that this is a real threat. And so, I get, the subject matter is the Ben Burgis debate, but like, I feel like people like Ben Burgis are really trying hard to have a conversation that, one, doesn't need to happen, like there's no requirement for it, two, is distracting from a much greater conversation, and three, that is just muddying the waters, like creating like, oh, well, some people think fascism's a big deal, other people don't even think there is a fascism, And to me, it's like we need to be unified. Like the liberals somehow, like, and maybe this is just because of our filter bubbles on Twitter and we see all like the Ben Burgess-y people being bizarre, but somehow the liberals seem to be more understanding of how bad the right is than the left is at this point. Like, is that like, do you agree with that, or am I being a little bit too reactionary?
No, I think you're right to an extent. I definitely think that it's important to understand, what your goals are here. If you're going to be saying stuff like, oh well, what Trump did was bad, but he's not a fascist. Come on, like, I don't know. At a point, it's just like, is that really helpful? What goal are you accomplishing? Are you really just carrying water for the right for no reason? Doing all this Trump apologia? But, he said at some point that, nothing in America approaches even close to what we had in fascist Italy or Nazi Germany. But we have Guantanamo Bay, we have our drone strike program, we have our subsidization of other violent groups like the IDF who go around terrorizing innocent Palestinians. So I think, it really depends on your perspective. If you have an American imperialist perspective, then sure, yeah, you would think that nothing that we've done compares to what happened in Nazi Germany or fascist Italy because you believe that what we did was right or justified. But, to an outsider, I mean, just look at... I hate to bring him up because he's such a disingenuous asshole, but Richard Medhurst, yeah, and yeah, boo, Richie Rich, boo. But yeah, if you look at some of his content, the more extremist, like leftist content, it definitely analyzes like American imperialism, or at least intends to, in that way that really hasn't been mainstream a lot. I think this is something that we're seeing a lot post Iraq War, where we're able to now platform these mainstream people who were, because again, and we touched on this in the debate, when Iraq was going on, when Afghanistan was going on, it was Republicans and Democrats both that were going in the media saying, yep, let's do it. We're all behind it. Support our troops and all that. It was everybody. And that's what makes it unique, right? That's what made it, like, terrifying for a lot of leftists, was the just complete unification of the American war machine, and seemingly no counter to it. And I think that was what allowed programs like the NSA and the TSA to be created. I think as long as we have a strong opposition party, I don't think something like that can happen again. But we need to have that strong opposition. If we have like a unified front with Republicans and Democrats again, I think sure, yeah, his argument that we could lose some securities in the future by prosecuting these people holds a little bit of water. But if he can't demonstrate any calculable harm that would come of it, other than, these people committed a crime, let's prosecute them for it. We do that every day. We do that with people who don't commit crimes every day. Innocent protesters get arrested and sent to jail, usually for just a couple days or something, but then released.
I'm a protester going through court cases right now as we speak. So,
yeah.
And I agree with that in the sense that, like, the Republicans and the Democrats, they are so wrapped up in the culture partisan war, right? Like the majority of the Republican Party, there's like maybe 10 of them that disagree, but the majority of them are like, yeah, January 6th, no big deal. Yeah, no, it was pretty cool. Yeah, no, it was. So now if all of them were like, oh, that was so bad, and then they voted to convict Donald Trump, and then that would have been a whole different calculation. That didn't happen. That's not the world we live in. And the other aspect to this is a lot of, like you were saying before, a lot of people like to compare what we're going through to like 1944, right? Instead of, I don't know, 1929 or 1936 or like, at any point before the worst parts of World War II and the Holocaust, right? And like fascism's almost global takeover. Like, we are not at that point yet, but we could be. And the whole point of learning from history is to prevent ourselves from reaching that final destination on this trajectory that we are going down. And a lot of people don't understand our place in history. This goes back to the fascism thing. It's like, oh, why are you calling people Nazis? Do you see concentration camps? Well, first of all, yes, I do. They're at the border, right? And they're all over the country. But let's assume they're not concentration camps. All right, well, Steel Man, like, oh, they're detention, whatever. Who cares, right? Whatever they want to fantasy world it. All right, well, do you see 6 million people being executed? As if that happened and like someone flicked a switch and 6 million people died. It was over the course of a long period of time, right? Like, let's assume, right, 30 years from now, like we're all on the moon or whatever, the Earth is destroyed, and we look at what happened, right? And it's like, oh, well, we can see that, oh, well, so many people have been killed in captivity in these detention centers, these concentration camps. Kids have been starved to death. Kids have been separated from their families, right? People have been murdered. People have been executed in these concentration camps. The death toll is now. It's happening now. Even under the Biden administration, there's still people dying in these concentration camps. This is a huge problem. And also, we go back to what America was doing during World War II. We had concentration camps for Japanese Americans, right? And so the idea that people are so, they're fixated on 1944, and, like, if it's not 1944, then it's not real, it's not happening. It's such a scapegoat, and it just proves that these people really have lost the plot, and they claim to be historians, they claim to be, like, people that read, but they're, like, I'm a high school dropout, and I know more about, like, Nazi Germany than Ben Burgis does, seemingly, and he's a college professor. Like, that's a problem for me. If a high school dropout knows more about fascism than a college professor, I mean, like, there's the sirens should be going off. I don't know what your education level is, but, you should drop out if you're still in there. No,
no, I completed high school, but I foolishly took a year off and then entered the workforce and never left.
It's over. It's done.
Yeah, that's the curse. That's the curse of the American working. But I think you're right. I think historically that is correct. I think, it is important to take a look at the full context of history as well. It did kind of surprise me that he hadn't read the Doctrine of Fascism, but if you've, I encourage everyone to go read it. It's just a couple pages. The language is a little bit weird, and there's a couple typos in the translation that's on Google, but it's great. It's a great read. It gives you a lot of context about what the self-proclaimed father of fascism thinks about what fascism is. And in it, he states that if the 18th century were for socialism, then the 19th century is for fascism. And we can see that it was really the 19th century that the American fascist empire kind of rose to power, so to speak, in that it was fascism that was kind of like becoming the primary train of thought, even though people didn't recognize it as fascism at the time. Just because you don't recognize something as fascism, or just because, you're not wearing a Nazi armband or whatever, does not necessarily mean that you don't hold some of the same beliefs. And I think that if you read the document, you'll realize that a lot of American thought these days just kind of lines up one to one. It fits almost perfectly in that slot right there, and it's scary. It really is.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't know what your time constraints are, but if you want to wrap up, just blink 3 times in a row.
Sure.
But first of all, thank you for coming on. You're welcome to come on the show
Thank you for
whenever.
having me.
I don't have guests on often, but that's because I have no friends. But I'm glad that you were able. I'm glad that, first of all, someone, not necessarily you, but someone was able to debate Ben Burgis on this topic. I'm glad that he didn't run away from it entirely. Obviously, I wish it were me, but you did a really good job. And like when I was watching, every time I looked at the chat, it seemed that most people were making fun of Ben. It seemed that most people realized that he had kind of lost the plot, and that a lot of people really who had no idea who you were and were impressed with what you had to say, and myself included, although I didn't know who you were. Impressed with what you had to say, and you even stumped a college professor who's written 2 books that he doesn't even abide by. And so, again, this conversation needs to be happening, and we need to be very clear about what the trajectory is that we're on, where we are in history, and how, we can draw parallels. Because, if we allow, let's say, the Lost Cause, I always go into this, the Lost Cause, created a world where only, 10-ish% of high school seniors know that the Civil War is about slavery. How is that possible? How do we get there? And that is because people, after a major event like the Civil War, didn't take it seriously. And again, I always loved, let's do a quick on the 14th Amendment, specifically Section 3. The 14th Amendment, the reason why I'm so dead set on the term insurrection, and I just spit, although I don't know if that was visible, but, oh God. Anyway, so the 14th Amendment, specifically Section 3, states that those who give aid and comfort to those participating in an insurrection are banned from having federal or state office. They had a war. They created constitutional amendments to prevent something like that war from ever happening again. And we have the most textbook case of an insurrection, and not even the Democrats are willing to just invoke the 14th Amendment and ban the entire Republican Party from Congress. That's what should have happened. Marjorie Taylor Greene should not be in Congress. Matt Gaetz should not be in Congress. That whole scandal that they're dealing with should not be existing, right? All those people that stood up there. Now, there's a separate argument. I think they're both wrong. But the people that objected to the election results before the joint session of Congress was interrupted, they should have all switched their votes afterward. But imagine what these people, their own supporters broke into the Capitol and destroyed the fucking place. And they went in there and still did their drone duty of, I object to the... Those motherfuckers should be... They should have been marched out in handcuffs. They should have walked up to the pedestal, done their whole thing, and as soon as the joint session was over, they should have been marched out in handcuffs. And anything less than that is enabling this to happen again. And because now they know we can invade the Capitol and everyone gets away with it. What? We can plant bombs at the Capitol and everyone gets away with it. What? How is that possible? And it's possible because, in my opinion, and I don't want to put this all on Ben Burgis as if he's the main bad guy, but people like him are too fixated on all these bizarre debates. We need to be very clear. This was an insurrection attempt. If I shoot you and you don't die, does that mean I didn't attempt to shoot you? Let's say I shoot you and it just chips your shoulder. Oh, hey, I didn't murder you, so therefore it wasn't attempted murder. What? They went in there thinking that they would overturn the election. Who cares how realistic it is, right? They obviously are entrenched in a fantasy world. So it doesn't matter how realistic it is to us, it matters how realistic it is to them. They think they're playing out like a movie, like Olympus Has Fallen or some shit, right? They think that they're main characters in a huge pivotal storyline. That they need to be dealt with in some capacity. Am I saying they need to be thrown in a cage for the rest of their lives? No, but we need to do something. We need to have some sort of any accountability process at all. And the whole like the fact that we're in July, almost in August, and there's still people out there that claim to be leftists that aren't clear about this, to me, I can't take you seriously as a person. I'm talking about you, Erin. I cannot take you seriously. But I can't take anyone seriously that doesn't think that this was an insurrection attempt. I'm sorry. Like, it's just, it is an attempted coup, full stop. It is an attempted insurrection, full stop. I mean, you can even make the argument that it is an insurrection because insurrection does not imply success. It just implies an action, right? And so, again, this whole debate to me is astounding. And again, I just want to say I'm super happy that you managed to go up there and make Ben Burgis actually shiver a little bit when he was like, "Oh, I didn't expect you to have a unique opinion," right? Like, I'm glad that you're up there. You got him to admit he doesn't even know what fascism is, which is pretty good. Next time, you got to ask him to define it because that would have been even better. And do you have anything else that you want to say?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it is important that we recognize that there is a conversation to be had here, but that when we're doing stuff like muddying the waters about what fascism is and is not, it's not really helpful. We already have states like Texas engaging in historical revisionism, where they are now telling people that, oh, yeah, we're not going to be teaching these certain things in class anymore. We're not going to be teaching kids about the Native Americans or about slavery or about any of the atrocities that we've done, and this is happening under the Biden administration. So this is my point, is that it's not just, it's whole scale through the United States. It's not just with Trump. There is a conversation here to be had, and we actually are kind of teetering on the precipice of having some kind of full-on fascist leader. I think if to your point about not really doing anything about some of those people that were there, a lot of those people were also the same people that were taking out fraudulent PPP loans and stuff like that. In that they had really no good intent. That they just wanted to get what they could and felt like that they would face no consequence for it. And we're seeing that, when they're prosecuting the people for the PPP loans and stuff, they're really surprised that the fucking police show up and stuff. But there is a conversation to be had here. I think overall we were spared the worst of what could have been with the Trump administration due to their incompetence. I think if they were just slightly more incompetent, we would be having, if they were slightly more competent, we would be having a different conversation today. I think if those insurrectionists, if they got one little win, if they got one objective done, we would still be having a different conversation today. We wouldn't be calling it, or we wouldn't be talking about whether it was an attempted coup or an attempted insurrection or whatever. It would be flat out. It was if they had gotten one of those goals achieved. And if that had happened, then yeah, maybe to Ben's argument about the security state and stuff like that, maybe we would see unilateral unification there between the Democrats and Republicans that would be needed to institute something like that. But I think we got lucky that that Trump and his cabinet were so politically inexperienced. I think it would be very, very dangerous if someone with Trump's disregard for our republic, our democracy, who also has political competence, happens to win the presidency. I think that would be very, very terrifying. I think that is what would install basically a fascist leader in the United States. Even with Trump, being as incompetent as he was still making jokes and participating in jokes of him and his family being rulers of the United States for the foreseeable future.
Like he would post on Twitter those like Trump 2020, 2024, yeah. 2028, yeah. 2032. Like that's exactly correct. And I really do appreciate that you're very much so like willing to have this conversation and be very explicitly clear with what we like. We don't live in those alternate universes that Ben is worried about. Like, and I get it, he's got like some sort of like, trauma from, the early 2000s, and I fully understand that. But we need to be very clear with what we're going through and how the trajectory works, and quibbling over the minutia of, is this technically is it technically a coup? Like, the one thing Ben said was like, well, I guess it's technically an insurrection, but should we be using that word? Like, to me, it's just it's bizarre, and we need to have more people like yourself that are coming out here and being very clear about this, because we can't even move on to the next part of the conversation if we have too many people wrapped up in whatever Ben Burgis's fantasy world is. Again, thank you for coming on. You're welcome to come on whenever. If you have anything you want to say with a platform of mine, feel free to let me know. That's you go, whatever. I mean, you can say whatever you want. You can leave. You can, I don't know. Whatever. I don't, there's no script here.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I'm going to go ahead and get ready for work. I've got like a half hour before my shift starts. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready for that. Again, thank you for having me on. I'd be happy to come on and talk about whatever you want to talk about at any time. Just send me a message.
All right. I will send you multiple messages. I will send you so many messages you won't even know what to do with them. So
Hell yeah.
Everyone else, have a great day. Go follow Erin. I will post your Twitter in there, and I assume that has all the other links on it. So.
Oh yeah.
So go there, and if you don't have a Twitter, who cares? Make one first of all. The fact that you don't have a Twitter by now is honestly it's participating in fascism to not have a Twitter account.
Exactly. Exactly. You're
go there. You'll get the links, and you will stop fascism by making a Twitter. So thank you, and then thank you. That's it. I don't know how to end stream, so I'm just gonna turn it off.
All right.
Bye.
Unbelievable.
Isn't it wonderful to allow protesting? No. Isn't it wonderful to allow protesting? No.
Well, you have to understand, the first time I ever heard of Black Lives Matter, they were chanting, "Pigs in a blanket," talking about police. Pigs, talking about our police. Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon.
Running against the worst candidate in the history of presidential politics puts pressure on me. Could you imagine if I lose my whole life? What am I going to do? I'm going to say, I lost to the worst candidate in the history of politics. I'm not going to feel so good. Maybe I'll have to leave the country. I don't know.
I eat extra sharp, that's what I eat.
Early in the morning, they went to the table with the black robe, the black shield, and they pulled out the vote.
$7 million for reef fish management, $25 million to combat Asian carp, $2.5 million to count the number of amberjack fish in the Gulf of Mexico.
Originally, the idea came up of me debating somebody else on this topic, and that didn't end up happening. It came up of me debating somebody else on this topic, and that didn't end up happening. The idea came up of me debating somebody else on this topic, and that didn't end up happening. The idea came up of me debating somebody else on this topic, and that didn't end up happening. But